So this is Guy Spear, and I'm with Brian Murray of Glancy, Prongay and Murray. So he's one of the named partners of the firm. And Brian, I am really grateful that you've taken the time to teach me and some of the other people about some of the subtleties about the work that you do. So I guess I'm going to start by just asking you to introduce yourself as if you were introducing yourself to somebody, a stranger who's walked into your conference room, let's just imagine brought in by me, who might be a future client. And I'm sure you've done that many times. So how would you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Brian Murray. As Guy said, I'm a partner in Glancy Prongay Murray. We are a class action litigation firm with offices in New York, where I work, and Los Angeles, where the rest of the firm works. Proportionately, it's probably about 3/4 in Los Angeles, 1/4 in New York. The work we do is, as I said, class action litigation. So that means we represent a person or business that has been somehow aggrieved by a wrongdoer, and they have a claim that is not sufficiently large to bring economically, individually, as their own case, but they can aggregate their claim with the claims of everybody else who has been harmed in the same way and bring what in the United States we call a class action. And as part of the class, all those claims put together have enough economic viability to bring the suit. So, in real terms, what this means is you're a customer at a bank, for instance, and the bank, on every monthly statement, just takes $1 out of your account for no reason. And there's no explanation. They just say, this is $1 we want to take from your account. So as an individual, or maybe you're a business with an account there, it doesn't matter, whoever you are, what can you do? You're certainly not going to bring a lawsuit to get back $1. It costs at least that much to file. In the United States, anywhere from $150 to $450 just to file a suit. Certainly no lawyer is going to take it, even on a contingency, to get his 33 cents out of your dollar claim. But let's say they have 40 million customers. Now they've stolen, in the aggregate, $40 million from everybody. So a $40 million case is certainly worth the filing fee. You can certainly find a lawyer that will take it on a contingency to get up to 1/3 of that $40 million. And if you need to hire experts, in this case, you probably wouldn't, but in many of the cases we bring, experts are necessary. In our securities cases and our antitrust cases, to prove damages, to prove wrongdoing, etc., an expert bill can easily be in the 7 figures. But if 40 million people are robbed of $1 each, you can afford $1 million for an expert as part of your cost of the case. So we bring these cases as class actions to get the money back for the people who were harmed. And also, as I'm sure we're going to discuss a little later on the podcast, as a deterrent for the wrongdoer to keep doing such wrong things in the future. A great benefit of the class action is companies know that they can't just keep ripping off people for small amounts of money and essentially be judgment proof. I mean, judgment proof is the wrong term. That usually means you can't pay. I mean, they can pay. Let's say they won't be lawsuit proof because nobody's going to bring the suit, like I said, for $1. But in the United States, we have the class action mechanism, and it becomes a $40 million case, and people bring them, and lawyers bring them through firms such as my own.
Brian, thank you so much. And I have no doubt that you've had plenty of opportunities to have to explain this to family members, children. But I learned quite a bit. I'm still a rube, but I'm not a professional in the business. But before we get to class action, and I want to dive into classes, there's another idea which actually was new to me, and I'm not even sure how prevalent it is in the UK, which is the legal system that I grew up in, which is the concept of a contingency. To take a case on a contingency, most of us, when we work with lawyers, it's some kind of agreed rate. But then I guess you'll tell me there's a very tiny proportion of lawyers who only work on a contingency, whether it's for a class or if it's for an individual. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of contingency cases and also how the law developed to allow lawyers to take cases on a contingency? Because in a certain way, when you take a case on a contingency, you become a partner with the plaintiff. And I think that many legal systems don't actually recognize the standing of the law firm to do that. The US, I know, does. Maybe some others do. I know you know it much better than I do.
To be honest, I'm not that familiar with the history of how it developed. Certainly, I'm aware of the dichotomy between the US system and the British system. I know they don't have the contingency fees as we have them in the United States. And obviously, our United States legal system grew out of the common law of the United Kingdom. So I don't know where they started to diverge and we started to allow contingency fees. As you said, when a lawyer works on contingency, his interest is aligned with the client's interest, which in the United States we view as a good thing, because the guy working on an hourly rate will keep working on an hourly rate as long as he's getting paid. Doesn't matter if he's winning or losing. If you're working on a contingency, you're really only interested in winning. I mean, you're not going to keep pursuing the loser case. You're not going to bring frivolous cases. And one of the great myths that has arisen in the United States is that, oh, these contingency lawyers keep bringing frivolous cases. And I got to tell you, a contingency lawyer has zero interest in bringing a frivolous case, because more often than not, and when I say more often than not, I mean 90% or 95% of the time, you just lose because it's frivolous. The judges aren't stupid. So your case is going to get thrown out at some point down the line. And I don't know if we're going to get into this later. There are many procedural points where you can lose. Well, we were talking about class actions in particular, but any contingency case as well. There are different pressure points, and a plaintiff has to win at every single one of those junctions. And your case can get thrown out at many places along the line. And to bring a frivolous case and to spend your time and, as I said at the top of the podcast, your money, because the contingency lawyer is fronting all the expenses as well. So that $1 million expert that's being hired for the case is being paid for by my $1 million. It's not the client's money. It's my actual money that goes to pay the expert. So why in the world would I bring a frivolous case, pay an expert $1 million, and then never get my $1 million back? Forget about losing my time. I lost $1 million cash. So back to the point that I started on, we view aligning the client's interest and the lawyer's interest as a good thing, because they're all on the same page, and they're only going to bring a good case with merit and pursue your meritorious cases to the end. The bad cases, nobody's going to have an interest in bringing in the first place. I'm not sure exactly what the law of partnership is in Great Britain. In the United States, only lawyers can be partners in law firms. I don't know if in the UK they allow non-lawyers, or what we call lawyers, you would call barristers and solicitors. I'm not sure if they can have an interest in the law firm per se. I know barristers kind of work for themselves. I know solicitors are more like what we would call a law firm here in the States. But we do not allow non-lawyers to participate in the profits of a partnership of a law firm here. So it's not a case where an outside person can buy an interest necessarily in somebody else's case. Only the lawyer or the law firm actually working on the case can have an interest in that case. Now, a really interesting rabbit hole to go down on this would be the litigation funding phenomenon that has popped up in the last 10 years or so.
It's funny, I had that down as one of my topics to cover. But just for your interest, Brian, I would say that I had not come across class action lawyers until I was forced to spend time around Delaware in a famous case called Horsehead. And but my experience of discussions after the end of that case with your firm and with others is that actually the lawyers who take cases on contingency are the most entrepreneurial, clearly, but also know the law the best, are usually some of the best practitioners and are the most businesslike and hard-nosed about evaluating things. So if you have a lawyer who's being paid by the hour, his job is to please the client. And pleasing the client may not involve getting even the client's best interests served, and it may not necessarily involve winning. It just means meeting some perception in the eyes of the client as to what is a good outcome. Whereas if you're a contingency lawyer, the only thing that counts is winning. So I've found that the lawyers who work in the contingency space are hard-nosed, accurate, and for what it's worth, and just to make Brian's point for the listener, is that I was blown away through my time in Delaware and Horsehead as to how small a world it is. Every lawyer in that Delaware court system has met every other lawyer. They all know the judges, they all know each other, they know each other by first names. And so each lawyer has a reputation with the judge, and the judges have a reputation with the lawyers. So there's enormous small world self-policing effect that takes place in terms of bringing frivolous cases. I mean, everybody knows what everybody's brought and how they did in front of the judge, basically. So you could bring a frivolous case 2 or 3 times, I suspect, and then a judge is probably your clients aren't going to come to you because they know that the judge is going to look leerily at any new case that you bring, given your recent history. So let's dive from that into classes. And I didn't think about how it's actually the economics of who can sue that creates the interest for the class. And I guess the two most famous classes after our last conversation, Brian, I thought about one is the class of asbestos sufferers, people who've suffered from asbestosis, I guess, and the other class is the tobacco class. And actually, I mean, the damages to some members of the tobacco class are rather large. So I guess what I wanted to check in with you, and I actually don't know the answer to this, do you specialize in classes that are related to securities law, or would you do other classes as well?
Uh, okay, that's actually a trick question.
Tell me why. I don't know. And you can't say trick question without me mentioning my favorite movie, or my family's favorite movie, which is The Murder Case in the South. Why am I forgetting it? My Cousin
My
Vinny.
cousin.
Yeah. You can't say trick question around law and not have me bring up My Cousin Vinny. But Brian, tell me why it's trick question.
Okay, well, first of all, just to answer your question on its face, uh, we bring many types of class actions, securities class actions, antitrust, or what in Europe they might call competition law, class actions, consumer class actions uh, based on the products. What you were talking about, so this is why it's a trick question, not just because the differential on the rear axis on a certain kind of car.
I'm glad you know the details of that movie. That's important. Go ahead.
Uh, well, you brought up the asbesto cases and the tobacco cases. Those are not what we call class actions here in the United States. That is a different kind of case, which is what we call a mass action, or commonly called a mass tort. The reason those are not class actions are because each case is so individual specific with regard to the facts and the damages. So it's not easily made into a class. And I think later on we may start talking about Robinhood, and we'll get more into what makes a class and how you can define one. But just using asbestos right now for the example, each person's asbestos experience is different. So, how they were exposed to the asbestos, how long they were exposed, where they were exposed, and in particular, how it manifested itself through their injury. Did they get lung cancer, which is one of the most common ways of getting it? But then, how did that lung cancer develop? How did it harm that individual person? Did he have to have surgery? Did he die? Different details like that. That makes it really not practicable as a class action, because for a class action, you need a common nucleus of facts. And obviously, there are certain common facts in an asbestos case, such as the most basic question in any mass tort is, does this product cause damage in a human being? What we call the causation issue. Does asbestos cause lung cancer? Can a breast implant, somehow cause breast cancer? Things like that. Can talcum powder cause cancer, which is a current mass tort? So certainly you have certain common issues with regard to the overall causation, but you have way too many individual issues with regard to the usage and the individual damages to make it a viable class action. So that's why we call these mass actions, because they get massed together. They're all individual cases. It's all John or Jane Doe versus Big Evil Corporation, Inc. But they each have their individual case. Like I said, there are certain common issues, so they get massed together. We have what's called a bellwether trial, or trials sometimes, which will determine what can be determined on a common basis, such as the causation. Did the drug you took cause a birth defect? Well, certainly that's going to be common to all of these mass action people in that particular mass action. So you can determine certain common issues, but then each case still has to be prosecuted individually. When did you take the drug? How long did you take the drug? How did that injury manifest itself in you? How many doctors did you go to? How many surgeries did you have? All of that is individual. So in the end, it breaks down into individual cases with certain common issues. So those are mass actions, not what we call class actions.
But they do have the common feature with class actions that they allow you to explore scale economies. So so there's sufficiently common facts across the mass action suit that allow one law firm to pursue something in front of the judge on behalf of all those people together, even if afterwards it's each individual set of facts.
Okay, so mass actions are their own particular kind of organism. So that it's not a class action in the structure, where in a class action you have one lead plaintiff who represents the rest of the class, and you have one law firm or maybe a couple of law firms that are running the whole case, sometimes with the help of other law firms as well that they utilize as they see fit. So basically, it's one, two, or three law firms running the whole show. Mass actions are massive, if you want to look at it that way. So you have tens of thousands of cases, typically in a mass action. And you have the only way to put it would be to say a consortium of law firms doing the whole thing. Typically, the judge who is overseeing the mass action will appoint what's called the plaintiff's steering committee. And that will be, say, 5 or 6 firms that have the most cases. And when I say the most, anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 cases that particular each firm has, in their portfolio of cases. And then under that, rubric, you have every other firm. So they bring all these cases together, and there's what's called the common issues and the common benefits. Like I said, that would be causation type stuff and expert type stuff. So all of these firms, and it's a gigantic consortium in these cases, will pool their resources together to pay for the experts to decide these common issues.
So, as you can see, Brian knows a lot more than I will ever know about mass actions and class actions. Just by way of background, I came to Brian Murray because I'd come to the end of a bankruptcy suit in which I was the chairman of the equity committee. We lost our equity. We felt there'd been wrongdoing. And we actually, I don't know if you know this, Brian, we looked at contingency law firms. I think there were a number of law firms in touch with us who they didn't take the contingency case. And I was a significant shareholder, so there might have been a contingency case there. And I am extraordinarily grateful for the fact that American securities law and law in general allows for this kind of action to go forwards, because it allowed us to learn more about what had happened. It allowed us to pursue our sense of injustice in an aggregate way through the fact that Glancy took the case, and otherwise we would not have been able to do it. The reason why I got in touch with Brian was because I was very curious to see, having experienced the benefits of the class action system, not that I'm a shareholder in GameStop, but I wanted to see what was the possibility that this would turn into a class action suit. And so I was lucky enough to get Brian to do some research for me for free. Not that he did a lot of it, but he knows a lot more than I do. And so Brian, why don't you just take us through, if I were an aggrieved GameStop investor who's a client of Robinhood, who felt like it was going to the moon, but then for a key period of 2 or 3 days, Robinhood didn't allow me to buy the stock. And now I'm super upset. And we have Mr. Portnoy, who says that all the people at Robinhood and Citadel and everywhere else should go to jail. And so we're all feeling rabble-roused, if you like. And so that seemed to me to be a perfect opportunity for the class action firm to take up the cause. And I'm curious to, and I guess maybe before we get there, I'd love to know how you evaluate what cases you engage in and what you don't. I mean, your firm has a limited amount of time, limited amount of resources, and you have to decide which cases you take. So before we get to Robin Hood, what is your process of review?
Well, that's a great question. So, meeting with another lawyer had to be more than a year ago. It was just pre-COVID at this point. But we're talking about various cases and opportunities to work together. And at a certain point, in the meeting, he said, so basically, most of your job is looking at cases and trying to figure out which ones are viable and which ones are worth bringing. And the answer is yes. That is a great part of what I do as a partner in the firm. There are a whole bunch of things, to look at when evaluating a case. First is basically just, liability. Did they do something wrong? I mean, if we can't prove that they did something wrong and that somebody was harmed as a result, then there's just no case. So, the first thing is just then the facts. What did they do, and why is it wrong? Not just morally wrong. Why is it wrong under the laws of the United States where we're going to bring the case? You, as an international financier, I'm sure are familiar with the LIBOR case. Anyone who doesn't know what I just said, LIBOR is the London Interbank Offering Rate, a borrowing metric which is set by a bunch of banks in London, where they get together and decide at what rate they're going to loan money to each other. And that rate is used as a benchmark for many things throughout the world. So at a certain point, these guys got together and they're just colluding to fix the rate at something lower than what it should, or sometimes higher than what it should have been, because they didn't want to look bad to their peers, like, oh, we'll take the money at X, we're not in bad shape, whatever. And there were many, many, many cases brought about LIBOR, and the presiding judge in the case in the Southern District of New York at one point said, they certainly did something wrong. But my question is it wrong under the laws of the United States? So, you can do things that are morally reprehensible, not necessarily legally punishable. So we have to hook up the facts to the law and make sure there's actually a viable case. Then we have to see if there's a venue to bring the case. Can we bring the case in the United States? Sometimes they do wrong things that affect people in the United States, but the wrongdoing, just picking a venue, out of nowhere, is in Vienna. That's the nexus of the wrong acts. Well, maybe then we can't bring the case in the United States. So we have to make sure we have a basis for jurisdiction here. You have to make sure there's a source of recovery. Do they have assets? You could be the worst person in the world and the worst actor and steal $1 billion from people. But if you well, I was going to say Bitcoin, that would have been a good investment. Yeah, let's say you made a bad investment with your $1 billion and it's disappeared. There's no more $1 billion. Well, you did $1 billion worth of wrong, but there's no way for anybody to get the $1 billion back. So there's no point bringing that lawsuit. So I guess to sum it up, a combination of things, wrongdoing, legal liability, jurisdiction, and assets from which we can recover.
That list that you went through, Brian, just reminds me of what you said in the first call that we had, and you brought up just now, is that in order for you to take the case and to decide to try and win, is that you have to be able to see your path through multiple hurdles, and each one of those hurdles probably in many cases is not obvious and is a significant hurdle to overcome. I mean, merely ascertaining that there's the assets available because they might be hidden, or ascertaining the facts as to whether there's wrongdoing. I mean, each one of these things, and it's not just ascertaining them for your benefit, it's that a judge in an open court has to be able to see it. And later on, this idea that you just realize when you get into I realize when I get into the plumbing of the legal system is how, you sort of think, those of us who don't work in the legal system think of it as being about justice. When you get into the plumbing, you realize that justice is some kind of faraway concept because you've got all these other things. By the way, I do hope that if in your hypothetical case of somebody stealing $1 billion, that even if there weren't any recoverable assets, that it would be a criminal case. And I would hope that somebody would be able to take it up as a criminal case. But let's dive into Robinhood. I mean, we just know the facts that are in the public. And let's just imagine for a second that a friend of mine has wheeled me into your office, and I don't own, have never owned, I'm not a client of Robinhood. I don't own any GameStop. I'm not short GameStop, not any of those things. But if I were, and I come into your office and for one reason or another, you're forced to spend some time with me being kind, and I say, Mr. Murray, I'm sure there's a case here. Please, could you start the work on a class action lawsuit? How would you respond?
Okay, in two ways. You used the word ascertain a couple of times when you were summarizing what I said, and one thing I left out of my analysis of what we look at to decide if we can bring a class action is the ascertainability of a class. So to have a well-defined class. But I'll get back to that in a second. But the first thing I would say to the potential Robinhood client is that we have to go back in time about 20 years to explain why they don't have a case against Robinhood. So 20 years ago, and this involves the telephone industry, people started getting cell phones more than 20 years ago. Let's go back to 1995, however many years that was. Cell phone companies had different plans, and you got certain minutes. This is before everybody had an unlimited plan. You get something, 60 minutes a month, 100 minutes a month, and they would bundle them, and then they would roll them over. And a very enterprising lawyer, as you said, class action lawyers are entrepreneurs. This guy is a particularly inventive entrepreneur named Paul Whalen, who's a solo practitioner, but he realized that these AT&T was bundling the minutes in a way that cheated their customers. So he brought a lawsuit against AT&T. AT&T immediately recognized what they were doing was probably not right, so they settled the case. He received a $3 million fee for bringing the case. And AT&T quickly realized that this was not a good thing for AT&T. that a guy, a clever guy like Paul Whalen can figure out a particular act of wrongdoing and stick them for a $3 million legal bill. So pretty soon after this case settled, arbitration clauses started popping up in various telephone contracts. So you could no longer bring a class action like Paul Whalen did on behalf of his client. You had to bring an arbitration before, one of the various arbitrable forums, whether AAA or there are various others in the United States. So you can't bring a federal lawsuit anymore, or even a state lawsuit. You have to bring your case as an arbitration. So now you're out of court. They then quickly caught on and said, because guys said, all right, you want me to bring an arbitration? Fine, I'm going to bring an arbitration on behalf of everybody in the class. So in addition to arbitration clauses, they started adding no class arbitration clauses. So not only do you have to bring your case as an arbitration, but you can't bring it on behalf of anybody else. Everybody has to bring a single individual arbitration. And at first, these clauses were particularly onerous. They were upheld by the United States Supreme Court, but they've evolved over time to be a little bit more fair to the person. Usually, the company has to pay the fees of the arbitration, things like that. But still, you have to bring your own individual arbitration, and you can't bring a class action, and you can't bring in a court case, period. So, from that tiny seed that started in Peck versus AT&T, we now have arbitration clauses everywhere in the United States. Anywhere they can be, they are, pretty much. And one of the cases they can be and are in your brokerage agreement. So every brokerage agreement that a customer signs now with their brokerage will contain an arbitration clause and say, I give up any right to bring a case in a state or federal court, and any grievance I have will be brought by arbitration, and it will not be brought as a class arbitration, just as an individual arbitration. Basically, if you have a grievance against your brokerage, like Robinhood, you're out of court from the moment that you've signed to that agreement and opened an account with them. And there are various ways that they slip this account in, this arbitration clause in, sorry. It could be what's called a click wrap or a browser wrap. So you set up your account online, and you click on something that says, I've read all the terms. That's another hot link that if you choose to, you can click on or not. But somewhere in there's going to be an arbitration clause. So your friend that comes into my office and says, I have a Robinhood account and I want to sue them, my answer to him has to be, well, you have to bring an arbitration. So I hope that you've lost enough money that it's worthwhile to bring your own individual case. Otherwise, it's not worth bringing at all, unfortunately. That's problem A. Now, let's get back to ascertainability. Let's assume there is no arbitration clause in an ideal world, and that's not the one we live in. But you can, by some miracle, you signed your Robinhood account and you crossed out everything that said I agree to an arbitration clause, and you mailed it back to Robinhood. And they said, okay, we'll still open your account. That's complete fantasy. But let's suppose you can bring a case. Among the things you have to prove in a class action is that you have a definable and ascertainable class. So who would be in this class of people who want to sue Robinhood? It would be people who say, well, I was going to buy Robinhood stock and I couldn't. They took that option off of the website. There was no way, I saw this thing going up, and it was at 30, then 50, 100, and I said I want to get in at 150. And I went onto the website one day, and I'm going to put in my buy order at 150 or whatever this price was that day, and I just can't. There's no option to buy GameStop. Okay, here's the problem with bringing this as a class action. Since they don't take orders by telephone, they don't take orders by fax, they don't take orders by email, the only way to do it is online. You can't prove that you were going to buy the stock at 150. Well, the only way to prove it would be by an individual affidavit saying, I fully intended to go online and buy the stock at 150. And in an individual case, that's fine. But as a class action, you can't have 2 million people putting in affidavits, because now it's no longer efficient and practicable to bring as a class, because you have a judge looking at 2 million affidavits, and that's really not how he wants or her wants to spend their time. So that's only on the front end, proving you're even in the class to begin with. Now you have to get to the back end of the class. Well, how was I damaged? Well, I was going to buy at 150, and I fully intended to sell at 250. So now you have another 2 million affidavits. So everybody's saying when they were going to sell, and everybody's not going to sell at 250. So you have, a handful of affidavits I was going to sell immediately, 151, 152, 175, 200, 250, whatever. You can't really prove what your damages are. So it's just not at all practical as a class action, even if you could bring a class action, which you can't, against Robinhood for that. Now, that's for, let's say, a breach of contract, a breach of fiduciary duty, however you want to style what they did wrong to you. The gist of this antitrust class action is that Robinhood and a bunch of other online brokers and hedge funds engaged in a conspiracy and acted in concert to stop the purchases of GameStop, I guess in essence to help out the hedge funds who were short, so that the price would stop going up. And those are the allegations of that case. Now, since they're not suing, Robinhood necessarily vis-a-vis as a customer. I mean, somebody might be a customer of Robinhood, but it's not really a customer class action. It's just alleging there was a big antitrust conspiracy, so you may or may not be a customer of Robinhood or another broker. You could be anybody. Of course, you still have the problems that I discussed with the ascertainability of the class. So you may have been harmed as a result of an antitrust conspiracy, not as a result of breach of contract with your broker. But still, how do you prove that you were going to buy at a certain price, sell at a certain price, et cetera? More than that, you just have, going back to what I said when you evaluate a possible class action, the liability issue. How are you going to prove that all these people actually engaged in a conspiracy and acted in concert? Now, in the antitrust laws, there's a concept known as conscious parallelism. So basically saying, well, it's suspicious when everybody does the same thing at the same time. So everybody decides, let's stop letting people buy GameStop. So, why are they doing that? Well, it's, kind of, suspicious on its face. That alone is not enough. You usually need what the court will refer to as plus factors, something in addition to the conscious parallelism. So, for instance, did they all engage in this conscious parallelism after they had a gigantic conference call together? And we don't know what was said on the conference call yet, but we do know that they had, a conference call, just making something up. That would be a plus factor. Or was there a gigantic banquet at the Sheraton Hotel somewhere, where all these actors were together in the same room at the same time, and then 3 days later started acting in concert, something like that. Something like that would be a plus factor. So now I have not read the complaint of this case, so I don't know if they're alleging plus factors, if any, or what they are. But you need facts like that, now or certainly down the line to be able to bring that case, unless you can bring out, actual facts. You get, an email from somebody, hey, I've got a good idea. Let's all stop, allowing people to buy GameStop so the price goes down. Well, that would be a great email if you could find it somewhere.
I think that I've, as from some of our other interactions, I'm super interested in conspiracies that are not provable. And in this case, the little that I know of the way securities firms operate is that they would have had legitimate reasons for wanting to stop the part. So it's complex. There may have been some of their own brethren that might go under if this didn't come to an end. But Robinhood themselves had issues on their balance sheet that meant that they could have taken the action. It so happened that the action that they took helped their brethren elsewhere on the street cover their shorts, but it also helped them with their own balance sheet, and they were perfectly within their rights to take action to protect their own balance sheet. Their business is primarily to protect their balance sheet, not to help a bunch of Wall Street bets guys take out some big hedge funds.
Well, that's an excellent point. And certainly that's something that they're going to point to as a defense. They're going to say, we weren't doing this as part of a grand conspiracy, even though that's what you say. We were just doing this out of our own, self-interest.
Yeah.
We had a legitimate business reason to do it, and we did. I mean, companies say that constantly in these kind of cases. Oh yeah, no, we had other reasons for doing it, not the bad reasons you say.
Right. Now we have this amazing phenomenon that both Ted Cruz and AOC were on the side of the Wall Street bets guys, obviously interested in the potential to gain votes from them. And is there, when you bring Congress into the picture, I mean, these arbitration clauses feel to me, I'm going to bring up a term that you'll actually explain to the listener what it means. They seem to be in restraint of trade. Isn't it possible for Congress, at least prospectively, to away the ability of firms to do this to protect themselves? I mean, the whole point of the class action is to take everybody who's lost a dollar and aggregate them up. And by forcing individual arbitration, you're taking everybody who's lost a dollar and saying they can't form a class. And isn't Congress able to just say, no, you can't do that?
Sure, Congress is absolutely able to do that. They can say you can't have arbitration clauses, generally that they can say you can't have them in specific, you can't have them in consumer contracts, you can't have them in whatever, they can legislate whatever they want, certainly. The issue is getting Congress to do it, and maybe this will be an impetus to have them take them out of brokerage contracts, in particular.
Yeah.
The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is an incredibly powerful lobbying organization, and they are, so let's go back to, Peck versus AT&T in 1995. Who was harmed by the lack of an arbitration clause in that contract? Well, a huge company, AT&T. So, who drives, business and business legislation in the United States? Huge companies. So, the Chamber of Commerce is strongly on the side of arbitration clauses, and they strongly lobby Congress to continue to allow these arbitration clauses. Now, just to digress for a second, so there's, like I said, there's been many cases in the United States involving, whether these arbitration clauses should be upheld or not upheld. One case which has gone up and down from the district court to the circuit court to the Supreme Court and then back down and back up and back down is a case involving American Express. It's a case between the merchants who accept American Express and American Express. And there were arbitration clauses, naturally, that Amex insisted on having in their contracts after a certain point with their merchants. And they said, well, you can't bring this as a class action because merchants have arbitration clauses. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce put in briefs as a friend of the court in favor of American Express, in favor of the arbitration clauses. And I don't know who said it, but I thought it was an excellent point. And they said, well, who does the U.S. Chamber of Commerce really represent? Big business or small business? Because this is not a case of, me, individual consumers suing Amex on my Amex contract. This is a business. They're all businesses that are in the proposed class in the American Express case. So, this is a case of arbitration clauses for the benefit of big business to the detriment of small business. But the point is, who does Congress usually answer to? The answer is big business.
Yeah.
So getting them to take these arbitration clauses out is going to be difficult. Now, it may be that there's be such an uproar over this Robinhood thing, they'll take them out of a limited, sector of arbitration clauses just for brokerage clauses. And who knows? It's a real uphill battle.
I don't know how closely you're following the Robinhood cases or case, but what is your best sense of how, I mean, it seems pretty clear that any attempts to pursue wrongdoing in the courts, other than this antitrust, but even the antitrust will be very, very hard to prove if they make any progress with it. Will this issue just die, do you think? Can you get a sense of whether Congress will actually take it up in a real way, or they'll find some other way to bring it to the fore? I think that on our last conversation, I said that I didn't think that the anger of 8 million Wall Street Bets members on Reddit was going to dissipate on its own. But I don't know, you may have a different sense. You may have other experiences.
Well, it won't dissipate on its own, but it will dissipate for other reasons. I mean, they'll find something else to be mad about. Right. Congress will find something else to be concerned about. I think one thing we spoke about on the call is, if a class action or a private lawsuit is not really viable, what else can be done? Well, the U.S. Department of Justice or different state attorney general's offices are not constrained by the problems of arbitration clauses or class ascertainability. The state AG brings a case and they don't have a class. They're not a client, so there's no contract between them and Robinhood. So they can certainly bring some kind of action and try to get justice for the people. Now, one of the problems is, there are different remedies that are available to the state or the federal office that brings these cases. Often the wrongdoer just gets fined. So there's a lot of money paid, but it goes to the U.S. government. It's not necessarily a restitution fund that's going to be, kicked back to the various people. But again, so now let's say they did want to have a restitution fund. Now we get into the same problems we had when we were talking about the class ascertainability. Well, who are they going to give it to? They got to decide, how much each person gets and whether they're even entitled to it. So if they wanted to have a restitution fund, they'd have problems. So it would just be money going back to the government as a fine, probably.
And they would only be able to pursue a criminal case, is that not right? Or can the DOJ pursue civil cases?
They can pursue civil cases.
They can.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be criminal. But like I said, they'll put the hurt on Robinhood in some way if they decide to do it. But it's not going to put money back in the pockets of the people who got hurt. And
it seems to me that those departments, so the DOJ, attorneys general in the states, the SEC, I mean, I feel that it's kind of hit and miss what they pick up and what they don't. So there's a kind of a weird combination of politics and other things that conspire to make them pursue somebody or not, or pursue an issue or not. So we were saying that, or I was asking you about the potential politicization, or the fact that I see that people like attorneys general, SEC, Department of Justice are kind of idiosyncratic in the way that they pursue cases. And perhaps it's unfair to say that it's politically motivated, but it's idiosyncratic. If you're an aggrieved person and for one reason or another you can't find your way through a class action suit or a contingency suit, it's hit or miss whether the DOJ is going to take your case or not. And you can't call up the DOJ and say, I've got a great case, you really ought to take it. You might be able to interest a newspaper, or you might be able to interest a member of Congress. And I guess it does feed into my third to last question, and then there's two and one, and then we'll be over, is that what I've learned, you kind of have this idea that justice will be served. And the answer is that the law is extraordinarily imperfect. There are just so many ways in which the law cannot. I mean, there are so many cases that you don't take. I suspect you see many where you see a very aggrieved plaintiff. If you had to guess, you would say, yeah, probably something was done wrong, but I can't prove it, or the law doesn't allow me, or there's an arbitration clause. What would you tell people like that? So people who've suffered a wrong, likely suffered a wrong that they're never going to win in court. What's the answer to them? And they kind of show up in your office and say, but I thought the law was about justice and I have rights, and those people did something bad, and I've suffered damages, and many people like me have suffered damages, and you guys are about justice, and why can't I get my justice?
Well, all you can tell those people is that sometimes the law sucks. I mean, it's just it does not say what you want it to say, and cannot do what you want it to do. Many potential clients or actual clients come to me, with problems, and they're like, just use securities cases as an example. And they're like, oh, but I lost all this money, and I'll explain to them, well, the law of damages is X, Y, and Z, and this is how it gets calculated. And I think you and I discussed, previously, problems with damages calculations, and how they changed the law in 1995 in the United States, to calculate damages in securities cases in a certain way that benefits the defendants and really harms the potential plaintiffs. And people are outraged when I describe this to them. They're like, well, I don't understand, but I lost the money. Why can't I get it back? I said, because that's not the way Congress wrote the law. And if you don't like it, you've got to write your congressman. They're like, well, this is outrageous. I don't understand. It is outrageous, but that's the law they passed. There's nothing we can do about it. And it was a law. Well, I was going to say written by Republicans. It was actually written by lobbyists to Republicans, passed by Republicans. And some people come in the office are Republicans, and they're like, I can't believe they passed that law. I'm like, well, you voted for them. So, you should write them a letter and tell them why you're not happy. But we can't really change, the laws as they're passed. And sometimes people are just out of luck. And, it's very unfortunate to have to explain that to them. And they're very unhappy when you do explain it to them, but sometimes nothing can be done.
Yeah. And it's been a harsh lesson for me as well. So second to last question, you brought up at the beginning the idea of litigation funding. And I've actually seen a number of business plans, and there are some businesses which appear to be extraordinarily profitable. Perhaps you could take, it's standing on one foot in one sentence or less, but will briefly explain what litigation funding is and what kind of interface your firm has had with litigation funding companies. How has it changed your business or helped it or hurt it?
Sure. So just, I guess, as an initial matter, we have really no business. I mean, I know a bunch of litigation funders, but we've never used them in a case. So we've had no business dealings with them on any particular cases that we're involved in. So just, and I can't do this in, 3 sentences or fewer. So
yeah, I get that. Sorry.
It may take a few more, but the way litigation funding works is that people with very deep pockets go to law firms that have cases, and they say, we will help fund your case. In a nutshell, as simply as I can put it, they're loaning money to the law firm, and it's essentially securitized by a particular case. So it's not like when a law firm may, for instance, have a bank line of credit, and a contingency firm is not like what we call a Wall Street or white shoe firm. The checks don't come in every month. The payment flow is uneven. So sometimes you'll dip into a bank loan to get you, for a month or 2 months till you get the next fee coming in, whatever it may take. A litigation funder is different than that. So a litigation funder loans you money, but unlike the bank where they just get paid back as soon as they can from the fee from any case, litigation funder will say, we're funding you for the XYZ case. And when that fee comes in, we basically get the money off the top of that fee. Or, the agreements can be any way they're structured, and the funder will say, we'll guarantee you don't have to pay back a certain amount, but we'll get, X amount of the fees, if it's a, non-recourse loan. They can be structured, any way, it's a contract between two parties. So any way the funder and the law firm wants to do it, but it will be case specific for an individual case. So the funder will look at that case, make their own evaluation and say, oh, we really think that you have a great case against XYZ. We recognize that you may need some, extra funding to get to the finish line on that case because it's an expensive case. They're fighting, to the last drop of blood, whatever. And like I said, basically a contract worked out between the funder and the law firm with regard to a specific case, and it can be structured however those two parties want to structure.
But you have not yet funded any kind of litigation or taken an early payment on litigation that your firm has done?
No, we have not. We are so far what we call self-funded, meaning that we use our capital reserves and or the bank loan if we ever get to the point where we may need that, but we've never gotten into the private litigation funding space yet.
Yeah, it's an interesting space, although it's just so weird the kinds of assets that can be funded. So the last question for you is that you went to Notre Dame, and of course now the most recent member of the Supreme Court went to Notre Dame. You may not be on the same side of the left-right divide, but as a graduate of Notre Dame, perhaps you could provide some commentary, insight, thoughts about the latest addition to the Supreme Court of the United States, Amy Coney Barrett.
I have to be honest. I don't think I've ever read a single one of her opinions when she was, on the circuit court. So, I really can't comment on her jurisprudence or her opinions or her writing ability or anything like that. Just reading about her, she certainly seems qualified credentially for the Supreme Court. So, she seems, like I said, just based on stuff I've read about her, intellectually, able to do the work of the Supreme Court. And also, just based on what I've read about her, I have no expectation she will ever issue an opinion that will be any great help to me or my clients. But maybe I'll be surprised. Who knows?
Somebody like Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have been more likely to.
Exactly. But sometimes people, when they get on the Supreme Court, I mean, I don't know if she will. I don't know if she won't. I mean, I don't know anything about her. Like I said, we'll see what her opinions bring when she starts writing them.
I think that I was extremely impressed with the way her intellectual ability on the confirmation hearings. And even though I'm a product, one could say, of Ivy League, and I guess Notre Dame is in a certain way Ivy League, but it's not on the East Coast or the West Coast of the United States. And so I just like that. I think that it's not healthy for the Republic when, most of the justices or most of the people who run the country come from about 3 different institutions. And so the more distributed it is, the better. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Brian. Thank you so much. I would just tell the listeners that, including pauses and what have you, it probably works out at an hour and a half at least of Brian Murray's time that he's very kindly offered for free in this case. But believe me, if you had to go and hire somebody of his caliber, you would be many thousands of dollars short by the end of it, with a lot of value added in the process. But lawyers are highly trained, know an awful lot, and are highly compensated for good reason. And I feel very lucky that you're willing to spend the time with us. Last word to you, Brian.
Last word to me. The only thing I'll add is that I think you have enraged, if not outraged, a sizable number of people on the East Coast by equating Notre Dame with the Ivy League. Because if there's one thing Ivy League people will point out is that Notre Dame is not Ivy League, and they're very, very adamant about like that.
Well, for my perspective, I actually, not living in the United States, but especially with Amy Coney Barrett, in my mind, it's the same general kind of, if somebody says they went to Notre Dame or to Duke, it's like they went to Harvard or to Yale, even though in the American mind, that probably means something very, very different.
It depends on the American mind, believe me.
Well, thank you very much, Brian, and thank you for your insights. And I think that the Robinhood shareholders will not be very happy, but so be it.
Well, that is unfortunate. I agree, but it is what it is.
We talked about it.